When Dead Space released in 2008, it almost instantly became one of the most popular survival horror franchises. It was Western developers' answer to the Resident Evil franchise, and the sequel went on to sell 4 million copies worldwide. However, due to unrealistic sales expectations set by EA following Resident Evil 5 and 6 success, the devs tried to appease the more casual gamers with Dead Space 3 by taking a more action-oriented approach and adding co-op, which didn't sit well with fans in the first two games. As a result, the third game didn't sell nearly enough for the suits at EA to be happy, and the franchise was put on hiatus, and fans never really got the closure they wanted from the series. When the remake was announced, fans had a lot to be skeptical about. The original Dead Space team had already moved on to the Callisto Protocol, and the new team, EA Motive, was mostly known for Rogue Squadron, a space shooter game. That, along with EA's history of killing studios and mishandling franchises, was reason alone to be cautious about the project. Out of the big three remakes coming out this year, Dead Space was actually the one that I was least excited about, since I figured Glenn Schofield and the team at Striking Distance Studios would take the Dead Space formula and run with it, while this would sort of be as like a cheap cash grab. And boy was I wrong, this is easily the best remake since Resident Evil 1. It manages to retain everything that made the original game so good, while adding modern improvements where needed and keeping the atmosphere and feel of the original. Any newcomers to the franchise should start with this game.
Entering zero gravity.
So much of the game's opening hours is basically a one-to-one remake of the original game. Engineer turned monster slayer Isaac Clarke volunteers to be part of the emergency response unit attached to the USG Kellyon, responding to distress signal from the USG Ishimura, where he hopes to find his wife Nicole. The crew crashes, and pretty soon thereafter the crew gets attacked by necromorphs. Dead bodies mutate into different forms that are hellbent on killing anything that moves. As the story progresses, we learn of an ancient artifact called the Marker that is causing all of this, and the followers of a cult-like religion called Unitology has infiltrated the ship in search of this marker. After settling in following the initial chaos, Isaac is left single-handedly trying to fix the Ishimura with only the moral support of Kendra Daniels, who opens a few doors every now and then, and with Zach Hammond taking on the lead role, telling Isaac where to go and what to do. Gunnar Wright from Dead Space 2 and 3 reprises his role as Isaac, and even though he wasn't voiced in the original game, it doesn't really change the story or the character interactions all that much. Everything still plays out as in the original game, but now we get to see more of Isaac's personality, which is essentially like a nerdier and less PTSD version of the one we see in the later games. A good thing is that he also doesn't run around yelling one-liners while taking down hordes of enemies, so he still feels like that silent, stoic engineer from the original that just took orders from everyone. It's a nice change that allows us to see his responses and interactions with other characters and makes the story more engaging than it was in the original. Tanya Clark reprises her role as Nicole Brennan, and parts of the internet basically went up in flames seeing as how she's much older now than in the original, but given that the voice actors have aged 15 years, it sort of makes sense, you know, and honestly, like, who really cares? Their story is now expanded with a new side story that changes their motivations and characterizations to be more in line with Dead Space 2's narrative. We get to see Nicole's entire Ishimura storyline play out through holograms and audio logs, and without spoiling things, I have to say that this new storyline makes the ending of the game like 10 times better than it was in the original. Mercer has also been reworked into a character with a much bigger presence and makes for a really compelling villain this time around, his experiments being some of the best enemies in the game. Isaac's connection to the Church of Unitology is established straight away in a log found in the crashed ship as you start the game, and their overall presence has been amplified in the game, and it really gives players a sense that some cult has infiltrated the ship. I honestly think that veteran Dead Space players will be surprised at just how well these new story elements fit right into the series' overall narrative, while still managing to not change previously established lore. And playing through the game as a person who played the original, it actually made the experience feel more fresh and exciting this time around. The USG Ishimura is really brought to life with the Frostbite engine. The new lighting adds a ton of atmosphere and ray tracing looks phenomenal. The game manages to do that thing that Diablo 2 did, where you could have sworn the game looked exactly like this back when you played it first time around, but then you turn on the old graphics and you're like, nice. The sound design also goes hard in this game. I remember an interview where Glenn talked about how they made a tram sound by recording the sound underneath the BART train and modifying it to fit into the game. And this attention to detail in the sound design is present in this game as well, managing to scare the players with sound alone. Now, one of the best things about this remake is that the developers realized that since most of the chapters take place in small corridors, streaming in assets and areas would probably work really well, making the Ishimura free from loading screens, and it's now a fully connected ship. The tram station isn't just a set piece that takes you from one chapter screen to the next. It's part of a well thought out level design that connects the entire Ishimura in a dynamic way. And the end result is that from the second you press play, you're jumping right into the game. And being able to freely roam between areas without loading screens in that way really gives the Ishimura a sense of place. Like, it is finally on par with the mansion or police station from Resident Evil. And it's also a big breath of fresh air after having to slug through the Callisto Protocol's vents and crawl spaces for 10 hours. Like, can we all just stop for a second to appreciate how much backtracking and interconnected level design adds to horror games? Like, it makes it feel like you're never really conquering any particular place, as there are always like new horrors to be faced in previously cleared areas and new items to discover. Like, if Mr. X just busts through a door and chased you from point A to point B in a straight line until you got to the next chapter, he wouldn't be nearly as iconic as he is. It just makes the place more believable and vast, knowing that you're stuck in this place fighting tooth and nail for survival. It should be the default way to design survival horror games, and I really hope that Resident Evil can at least bring some of these aspects to some of its areas in the remake. Now, I didn't replay the original games right before the remake came out, but even without everything fresh in mind, the USG Ishimura looks exactly the way I remembered it in my head. Every area I went to, I was like, yeah, I remember this place. And the layout of most of these places was pretty much identical to the original game. Like, they really went all out in getting all of the places to match the tone and feel of the original game, and every iconic scenery from the original is still there. Also, with the new graphics, you're really able to see all the little like horrors from each of the new areas brought to life in a new way. And the new in-game cutscenes are amazing, and they keep them to a minimum, so they like never really interfere with the moment-to-moment gameplay, so you're never taken out of the action. So one thing that I do remember from the original is the ADS cannon section, which has been completely reworked. It's now an entire section where you have to sync up to the defense system with your gun and aim it as you normally would, and overall it's just like a more enjoyable section of the game now, and this kind of attention to detail is what they've brought to the entire remake, which just makes it such a good game this time around. Now, one thing that I really enjoyed was that even though like Isaac now has a voice, he didn't constantly like give hints to the solutions of puzzles. You're basically dropped into a room, told to fix shit, and it's up to you to get it done. Like, it's just kind of rare to see these days with designers like hand-holding gamers through every step of the way, fearing that if a player didn't understand something, it somehow must be like their fault and they need to fix it. And it's like, no, sometimes gamers are just stupid. Aside from the story side quests, there's a new one involving finding rigs to upgrade your clearance level to access new items, and it also gives you a reason to backtrack and unlock new weapon upgrades and finding extra ammo that you so desperately need. There are also circuit breakers placed throughout the Ishimura, giving the players choices on how they want to tackle certain areas, like cut the lights and wander around in the dark with necromorphs chasing you, or cut the air supply and watch your oxygen dwindle as you desperately try to survive. Like, all of these new additions really help filling out the areas and change them for the better, since if they had just ported the like original Ishimura design and removed the loading screens, it would have just like felt flat, since everything would have felt so empty anyways. And like, the only thing that I could wish for as an improvement is for a certain enemy that you encounter later on in the game to follow you around the ship, like as you backtrack through and find items. Like, imagine the Ishimura with a pursuer type enemy following you around as you try to grab the items that you missed in previous areas. Like, one can dream, right? And the best part of all of this is that all of the gameplay mechanics from the original are here, and it kind of stands to the strength of the game that 15 years later we still haven't gotten that many new interesting game mechanics in horror games. Yeah, you're basically like still dismembering your way through hordes of necromorph enemies. But this time around, there's a new peeling system which clearly showcases like limbs being damaged and how many more hits they can take before being dismembered. And of course, once dismembered, you can grab the limbs using telekinesis and throw them back at enemies, saving ammo and resources. Weapons are now found much more organically than in the original, being picked up from dead bodies all around the Ishimura, and it really makes it feel like they were used in like a last stand against the necromorphs, and it's one of the things that really adds to the feel and story of the game. Like, it feels like something really messed up happened here. The weapons themselves can be upgraded using nodes found all throughout the Ishimura, and you know, they increase damage, capacity, reload speed and so on, and they also unlock new upgrades. For example, the plasma cutter has a new damage over time upgrade, which turns like an iconic weapon into like a real killer machine. Like, as in the original, you basically just need this weapon for the entirety of the game, but there are just so many weapons that are just like so fun to use that I'm gonna get into right now. So for example, the line gun tears most enemies to pieces and dismembers several limbs at once. And it's also a really good showcase for like what some of the more creative players will be able to do once they figure out how to use all the alternate like fire modes, and it's like really fun to use. However, like the flamethrower is kind of boring in general, since all you do is aim and hold fire until things burn to death. But its alternate fire mode can like kill those like tentacled guys on the wall without wasting too much ammo, so like it has its use cases. The same goes for the saw blades. It conserves ammo by only wasting one blade on enemies at a time, but it's really not like that fun to use because like again it's basically just like a point and hold weapon that doesn't really, it's not really fun, I guess. And the pulse rifle is still an all-around staple as well, and like really useful when you want to pop some sets on the big guys. So if you combine it with the plasma cutter and the line gun and like throw in the occasional force gun into the mix, and you're pretty much like set on to take on everything in this game. And this is like the combo that I used for the entirety of the run. The contact beam shoots a line of energies at enemies and is really useful at killing those like tiny enemies that keep popping out from everywhere. They're like super annoying and they make you press E and whatever. It can also charge and insta-kill weaker enemies in one blast as well, which is really cool. However, one of the coolest weapons in the game is the force gun, since you're literally like blasting the flesh apart from the necromorphs. And it's really showcasing how well the like new peeling system works, because like you're blasting away the layers of the enemy, and it looks, any horror fans will love this. It also has a pretty nifty gravity well upgrade that catches enemies and bunches them all up together, making them easier to kill. So it's basically like an all-around really useful weapon to have. One thing that can be quite annoying, however, is that the system that is used for dropping items to the player seems to be based on whatever weapon you have equipped currently, which means if you equip several weapons, you're gonna end up with less ammo for each of them. So if you're trying to bring weapons that you want to use for different use cases, i.e. by saving ammo by using the flamethrower on the tentacle guys on the walls for example, you're gonna end up picking up useless flamethrower ammo instead of plasma cutter or line gun ammo, so it might be better to just use like 1 or 2 weapons for everything, since if you equip more, you're technically still wasting a lot of ammo by not ever getting them to drop to begin with. Like melee is also a great way of conserving ammo if necessary. Throw some stasis on an enemy if you're near a stasis refill station and like start hammering away on them. Also, like if I'm not mistaken, you need to aim a bit more carefully when meleeing than in the original, because I don't remember having to move from like side to side in order to hit their arms, which certainly like makes it good, but it's not like a get out of free jail card like it used to be in the original. And the new 0G controls are way better, and it's not surprising given their work on Rogue Squadron. Like it's actually kind of cozy just zipping around in 0G, putting all the antennas together. Compared to Dead Space's original system of aiming at a surface and jumping through the air, this is like just miles and leagues better. One thing that would have been nice, however, is if pressing space propelled you upwards and like C or control propelled you downwards, so you didn't have to aim wherever you're going before moving there, but that's kind of nitpicky, but like it would have been nice to have. Also, a part of what made the original game so scary was that once you heard
Entering zero gravity,
the sound disappeared as well, and all of a sudden in like the calmness of space you get jumped by necromorphs. All of that is in here, and since you can now roll around in like space, you're basically free to move however you want, which makes for some really like intense and cool zero gravity fights. And like Dead Space has always been one of those games that is more fun the second time around, since you get to play with all the weapons and upgrades unlocked. And unlike the Callisto Protocol, this game actually comes with New Game Plus from the start. You can upgrade your suit to level 6, which is based on like the Earth Defense 4 rig, and it looks really cool. And also there's like new marker statues to collect, which will unlock an alternative ending and new story details. And yes, all in all, there's just like a ton of gameplay for players to enjoy in this remake. Like nothing is hidden behind any DLC or paid content, like it's all in there from day one. So yeah, Dead Space proves that EA can make great games if they just allow devs to do what they do best. Motive really came out swinging with this remake and set the bar really high for the Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 4 remakes. And this is like literally the first game since the Resident Evil 1 remake where developers have managed to capture the atmosphere and all of the key moments of the original and just improve them in every area. And it's kind of funny since the Resident Evil 2 remake is what inspired this game to even exist to begin with, since Motive can just point to its success when pitching the idea to EA, and even though RE2 is one of my favorite remakes, there's no denying that it's still removed like a lot of elements of the original game. And considering that Capcom has been churning out remakes with differing quality for a while, it's nice to see that some other franchises are getting in on the action. Going forward, Dead Space will be the comparison I will use for how a remake should be made. They took the original game and included literally everything, while expanding on every character and improving the story without changing it so much that it doesn't fit in with the sequels. It just goes to show how much care and attention Motive ended up putting into this game, and I can't wait to see what this studio will do to Dead Space 2. But for now, we'll just have to settle with a banger of a game.